Kim, and I'm going to be your main trainer for today's workshop, which is called Healing from Toxic Whiteness. Because we struggle to even still acknowledge as a society that, people of color are being systematically and historically and continuously, pervasively harmed by white supremacy, there hasn't been as much conversation about how white supremacy is actually emotionally harmful to white folks. And so, and in the feminist movement, we do talk about how patriarchy has been harmful to men, and how toxic masculinity was created by patriarchy that yes, gave men male privilege, at the same time put them in this box, this man box, that was very emotionally damaging to them, right? And so similarly, and I think anytime you have systemic oppression and personal privilege, there's emotional harm, right? And that this gets compounded over the generations.
First of all, just note that phrase there. This gets compounded over the generations. We'll be looking at that more closely in the next video. But what Sandra has just done is to use the existence of one made-up phenomenon, toxic masculinity, to justify and explain the existence of another. If male privilege and toxic masculinity harm men, then of course white privilege and toxic whiteness harm white people, right? It just makes sense. I mean, it might if the original premise was something provable. The switch there was, as far as we're told, the entire justification for the necessity of the course. There was another small thing there, I'm not sure if you caught it. Toxic masculinity, which was created by patriarchy.
And how toxic masculinity was created by patriarchy.
Here, Sandra gives patriarchy agency, so that it's not a descriptive term, but an actual thing. Soon we'll see her doing the exact same thing with white supremacy, describing it taking action for certain reasons and to accomplish certain outcomes. This goes a long way to convincing us that this is a real thing. I mean, if it's doing all these things, it must be powerful, right? Look at all the evidence. Of course, even more ridiculously, she's taking things that do not exist, attributing them to something else that does not exist, and calling it an argument. Toxic masculinity was created by patriarchy. Therefore, the existence of toxic masculinity proves the existence of patriarchy. It's like me saying, my invisible purple elephant created this invisible pink balloon. Oh, you said my elephant doesn't exist? Well, how would you explain this invisible pink balloon? The argument is no more sound just because it uses longer words and more obscure concepts.
And so one of the things I wanted to talk about is just the really kind of confusing world, like white supremacy, I feel like gaslights white folks, right?
There it is, for the first time in this video. White supremacy gaslights people. So what is gaslighting? Her explanation was terrible and assumed a lot of knowledge, so in case you're unfamiliar, gaslighting is a psychological concept named after a 1938 play, Gaslight, in which a man drives his wife crazy by changing small things in their home and telling her she's insane when she notices them. The term has come to be used for anyone deliberately trying to convince someone they are crazy by undermining their sense of reality. This is, of course, a rare but terrible form of abuse. SJWs, though, are not ones to keep things rare and terrible, and they've altered their use of the term to encompass any time someone disagrees with them or contradicts their assertions or lived experience. Someone says something you don't like, obviously they're gaslighting you, which means they're abusing you. The psychology textbooks say so. SJWs now routinely claim that gaslighting doesn't have to be deliberate, and that having doubts about your own version of reality is a clear sign that you are being gaslighted. All the reason you need to double down in the face of conflicting evidence rather than thinking twice.
And so the way that white supremacy does this is that it teaches you, one, that being racist is one of the worst things that you can be, right? I think I read somewhere at some point that I think it's second to being a pedophile.
This speaks for itself. But if white supremacy teaches us that being racist is one of the worst things you can be, second only to pedophilia, then it's doing a terrible, terrible job. If our society was one of white supremacy, it would rely on racism, not despise it and teach of its harms. Her argument is that it's in the interest of white supremacy, whatever that means, to have everyone think being racist is terrible, because this means people have a mental and emotional block to seeing racism in themselves, since they don't want to admit they're such bad people. This is important because it's how they get around the small problem of you not seeing racism everywhere. I'm not racist, I'm married to a black woman. Well, of course, you don't want to see yourself as racist when you have a black person that you're so close to. Of course you can't admit it to yourself. Well, my friend isn't a racist, they care about people more than anyone. Yeah, you see, you just don't want to admit to yourself that they're a racist because you've been taught that that makes them such a horrible person. See, there's no choice then but to take their word for it.
And at the same time, these racist behaviors that are really conditioned, trained into folks, white folks particularly, they're seen as not racist, racially neutral, or they're sometimes even seen as anti-racist, like being colorblind. I don't see color. Like that is supposed to be actually anti-racist, when the reality it is actually racist.
Again, this is all meant to demonstrate the existence of white supremacy and toxic whiteness, and to explain why you can't see it. White supremacy is so strong that it teaches us that these very racist things aren't racist. How blatant can you even believe it? Of course, when you're thinking to yourself, but that's not a very racist thing, then that's just proof of how well the lie has worked. Your own thoughts are further proof of white supremacy. The fact that it's invisible to you merely proves how powerful it is.
And then in addition to that, we get taught that all these ways of white privilege don't actually personally benefit you. They're just normal, right? And so if you don't believe that you are personally benefiting from it or intentionally engaging in like explicit hatred, right, of people of color, then you have no personal responsibility. It has nothing to do with you. You've never colonized directly.
You've never colonized directly. You've never colonized directly. You see now how this is working. If you don't believe that you are benefiting from white supremacy or that you're being racist because you haven't engaged in actual racist behavior, colonizing or enslaving or excluding black people from things because of the color of their skin, then this is just proof of how racist you really are and how pervasive white supremacy is.
And then it also says that, of course, if we do talk about racism, and that only harms people of color. We don't talk about how it harms white people, right? Right. So it's like kind of like this is a deep rabbit hole, right? And as you start to unpack this for yourself, it gets really confusing because you find that how you've been unconsciously conditioned has actually been racist.
I don't know about you, but that's really all I can take in one sitting. But the next video contains my personal favourite concept of the class, intergenerational trauma. If you thought this was crazy so far, just wait. Next, we'll talk about how racism is in our genes and how we can feel the emotions of our ancestors. If you're not subscribed, make sure you do, because you're not going to want to miss it.